Please welcome President of the Women's Forum of New York, Daisy Holmes.
Good morning. Welcome to our panel, Women Changing Society. In 1974, the Women's Forum was born as part of social change, as women challenged role definitions and limitations based on gender and demanded access to professional opportunities across cultures and careers. In the subsequent decades, the fight has continued for equal pay for equal work, constitutional recognition of equality in the United States, and an end to sexual harassment and gender discrimination in the workplace. Today, the fight has expanded to the virtual world, where women face new types of bias, both in tech companies and the algorithms that drive the content we see and decisions we make. Where is the women's movement today, and how is it perceived by different generations? Our panel examines these issues from three distinct viewpoints. Our first panelist, Jessica Berman, is a powerhouse in the business of sports, having served in the National Lacrosse League and in the National Hockey League before becoming the commissioner of the National Women's Sports League. Under her leadership in 2022, the NWSL has risen as a global player in women's sports, setting records for match attendance and viewership. Please welcome Jessica. Our next panelist is Gretchen Carlson, an internationally recognized advocate for women's rights who helped pave the way for the global Me Too movement. A former CBS and Fox News journalist, she co-founded Lift Our Voices, as an author of New York Times bestselling books and championed two landmark US labor laws. She was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. Please welcome Gretchen. Our final panelist is Tracy Chow, an advocate for diversity and inclusion in tech. She was an early engineer at Pinterest, Google, and the US Digital Service, and she helped jumpstart the practice of tech companies disclosing their diversity data. She is currently the founder and CEO of Block Party, which builds tools for online safety and anti-harassment. She was recognized as one of Times Magazine's Women of the Year in 2022. Please welcome Tracy. Our moderator, Holly Ransom, is an award-winning keynote speaker and has led discussions with influential figures, including Barack Obama, Bill and Hillary Clinton, and Billie Jean King. Please welcome CEO of Emergent and global and member of IWF, Holly. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Daisy, for that warm welcome. Good morning, everyone. I could not be more thrilled to have the opportunity to lead this conversation about women changing society, just that small topic. I think if we learned anything last night, let's hope the plan does not involve buses, all right? Now, but all seriousness, this conference has done a remarkable job of focusing on all manner of change in the world, absolutely. Here to the conference organisers. And really importantly, how women are a force for good within that. And I think the most moving moment for me of the entire conference so far was Muriel Fox on stage yesterday. Passionately and poignantly reminding us of the very DNA of this Women's Forum, that it was in the women's revolution. And I think that's important in the context of the conversation we're about to have, because the question we want to explore this morning is the revolution still here? Is that still a relevant conversation, or are we now talking about more focused advocacies? We won't have audience questions in this panel session, but what I believe we will do plenty of is giving you rich food for thought and conversation, not only to think about your own work and leadership, but to think about the future and relevance of our movement over the next 50 years. So with that, let's jump into our conversation. And Jessica, I want to start with you. I think about 50 years ago, and Billie Jean King, who was the first person really in the world of sport to make this compelling argument that really in many ways you're making today with the world of soccer or football. We're talking about round ball football for anyone. Some people call it soccer. I know we've got a lot of international friends who are like, what is this soccer? We're talking about football. Now, you've made the really strong case it's a business. There is a profitable market for women's sport. This is not something that's a charity, and women should be paid accordingly. It's been hard to ignore the women's sport presence on the zeitgeist in recent history, particularly with Caitlin Clark going #1 in the WNBA draft, walking into a $75,000 first-year salary when the beginning salary for a first-year player in the NBA is $1.12 million. A stark contrast that has really focused attention on Jessica's world. Now, Jessica's risen through the ranks of the world of sports administration before she took over the helm of the National Women's Soccer League, which I'll affectionately call the NWSL during our conversation. She rose in it, importantly, at a really challenging time. We heard about this yesterday. Women often get leadership at a challenging moment, and Jessica's story is true to that. She took over at a time where there was allegations of widespread emotional and sexual misconduct. She came into a clean-up job, and not only has she rebuilt trust, but she has transformed the commercial proposition, notably securing last November a broadcast deal worth $240 million, which I just want to stress is 40x on the last deal. An extraordinary achievement. Absolutely. Now, Jessica, critical to that has been your repositioning, that there is a business case. This is not a charity. And I want you to help us explore this idea of why that mindset shift has been such a game changer for what's happened in women's soccer.
Well, thank you for that, and it's an honor to be here with all of you, and I can't wait to learn more about your stories just from the brief introduction. I think having spent my entire career working with, for, and on behalf of men has really helped me to reframe what the basic fundamental tenets of business that have driven the professional sports industry in North America to be the pioneer of the business model in professional sports have really helped, because I've spent my whole career at professional sports leagues that were for men. And there were certain expectations and fundamental assumptions that were never challenged. No one ever asked for the ROI model. No one ever asked for the historical data that justifies how we're going to make the future investment. It was always driven by the competitive tension in the market because of the zeitgeist in the US around professional sports. And so everyone just wanted it, and that created the competitive tension to drive up the value. So the way that we approached the reframing of our business at the NWSL was essentially to go back to the basis. I'm a lawyer by training, I'm a labor lawyer, and we needed to start with process. So what had historically happened in women's sports is really this framing of, please do us a favor, this is charity, can you help us, will you support? I've banned all of those words. There is no support, there is no help, there is no charity. This is a business, and we showed up in the marketplace with a process, things that are not questioned in other businesses. We did an RFP. That's like not novel, as I said. The result is novel, but we sent out an RFP for our media rights deal. We sent out an RFP for our expansion team that we sold. And the result was that people were interested. And when you reframe something as a valuable proposition, people actually want to be part of it. And when you have competitive tension, that drives the price. So that was really the reset that was required, and I could talk more about it.
But I love that piece there, you know, the process, but also the valuable proposition, the two Ps that I heard really clearly there. What implications do you think this has for women leaders in the room in non-sporting industries? Any parallels or ideas you've got for the relevance for them?
Absolutely. I think we know from Billie Jean King, who's been referenced multiple times, you have to see it to want to be it, and professional sports provide a platform that has an outsized influence on society. This is not new in 2024. This is something that one of my heroes and inspirations, Nelson Mandela, coined as sport as a platform to change the world. And that is the reason many of us, including myself, work in this industry. And so when people see, and I don't just mean girls, when humans, boys, girls, men, women, non-binary humans see these incredible athletes performing at the highest level, and when I tell you the 1,000 or so people in this room that the best soccer players in the world play here in this country. The best soccer players in the world play here in this country, not men, but women. And so, yes. And so, if you like greatness, you should watch the NWSL. If you like interesting stories and fascinating humans and these women who are absolutely incredible and inspiring not just little girls, but little boys, watch the NWSL. And what I have observed is actually, and I have 2 young boys, so I have a sample size of 2 in my home, and I use them often as my focus group. And they are die-hard professional sports fans, and honestly, if I'm having a vulnerable moment, never paid attention to women's sports. Having them in my ecosystem and watching the way they, at a Gotham FC game, which is our team here in New York, passed right by Eli Manning. They are diehard Giants fans, and he won the Super Bowl, for those who don't know. They brushed shoulders with him at a game, didn't look back, and went to get autographs from our players. And I was like, what is actually happening right now?
I love it.
I went over to them and said, do you know that was Eli Manning? And they were like, yeah, he's retired and less interesting. And I went over to Eli and I said, he's an investor, to be clear, so he's like on board. And I said, just so you know, this just happened. And he went over to my boys and he was like, fist bumps. They are so much cooler than I am. And that's what we see happening. And so yes, I do believe there's applicability beyond our ecosystem.
Absolutely. I want to desperately defend the Matildas, but I won't misuse my power as the moderator here. But I think the really important point is I do believe we'll turn around in a generation and say, oh my gosh, look at what women's sport has done for gender equality. The role modelling, the way that you're reframing hearts, minds, value propositions is so significant. Gretchen, I want to come to you, and I'd love you to take us back to 2016, a moment of extraordinary courage, the decision to speak out about what happened to you, which you've described as feeling like you were jumping off a cliff all by yourself. And it's important to contextualise that when Gretchen spoke up, it wasn't until 15 months later that the Me Too movement exploded. So you really were early in this process. I'd love for you to share with us what gave you the courage in that moment to ignite the movement that has been such a force for change for women all across the world.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I guess it helps that I wear this bracelet 24/7, which says badass. But quite honestly, my parents raised me to be a badass. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, and I had Midwestern sensibilities and a mom that told me every single day, you can be whatever you want to be, but it will take a tremendous amount of hard work. And I believed her. My life has worked in so many mysterious ways. It's not like you put on your resume, hey, I want to become the poster child for sexual harassment in America. Not something that I was working to attain. But I think what happened is, and I was telling you this earlier, Holly, that the through line in my life, through all the twists and turns, has been incredible hard work, perseverance, and never, ever giving up. And so when I found myself in a dire situation, and quite honestly, when my career was taken away from me, a career I had killed myself for over 30 years when they fired me at Fox News, I decided if I don't jump off this cliff and tell the truth, who will?
Yeah.
And I jumped into an abyss without a safety net. But you know, the amazing thing that happened was that there was a safety net. And it was all of the women across the world who started reaching out to me and buoyed my spirits in my darkest time and told me eerily similar stories about what had happened to them, about how they had had the courage to come forward, they had been forced into silence, and they all said to me the same thing: thank you for being the voice for the voiceless. And that is what has triggered my life now. Again, going back to how I was raised, that I'm going to do something about this. I am going to work hard to change our laws and change our culture, because people in 2024 or 2016, when I jumped off the cliff, people thought we had solved this. And you know why? Because all of these stories were going to secrecy. And that's what I'm changing. We have learned that the only way that we affect change is to talk about it and to become more transparent. And to my dying day, I will do this for every protected class in America and around the world.
Yeah. Gretchen, when we were talking backstage, you said something to me that really hit me between the eyes. You said, I don't own my story, but I will do everything in my power to make sure women everywhere can own theirs. And I think that's such an important purpose to go to work for. And I'd love for you to give us a little bit, particularly for international attendees, you've had a real focus on arbitration clauses and NDAs. Can you explain to us, give a quick 101 if you could, around why that's been so much of the focus of the work with the organisation you've built, Lift Our Voices? Why is that the epicenter of where you focused?
Yeah, so the two evils, the two silencing mechanisms in workplace contracts or handbooks: forced arbitration, NDAs. How many of you out there know what a forced arbitration clause is? Do you know if you've signed one? People have no idea what they're signing. A study released last year said that 99% of Americans do not know what a forced arbitration clause is. But 84% of all Americans in 2024 have them at work. That has skyrocketed from 2% in 1991. So what is it? Forced arbitration is an American problem. Arbitration was invented to unclog the court systems for small business disputes. Instead, lawyers and companies got very smart because they realized it was a secret proceeding. Let's figure out how to use this for human rights violations so that nobody ever knows our dirty laundry. So after Anita Hill in 1991, companies said, okay, I guess we have to start having sexual harassment training, but at the same time they were saying to each other, we can't have an Anita Hill here. So how do we cover it up? And that was the absolute explosion of forced arbitration. You don't get the same amount of witnesses, you don't get the same amount of depositions, there's no rule of law, there's no appeals. Lawyers won't take your case because the numbers that we'll talk about later are staggering against you. And the whole process is secret. So you get pushed out of the company, you never work again, the predator or the wrongdoer gets to stay on the job because nobody knows about it, and the vicious cycle continues. And this is what I'm working to change. NDAs are a global problem. 1/3 of all Americans, however, sign them on their first day of work, thinking they're only protecting proprietary information. No. You are being silenced for something that hasn't happened to you yet. Think about that, how crazy that is. So I'm working to get rid of that too, and globally NDAs are a huge problem, but there's a huge movement in Australia where I've gone to speak, and in Canada and in Great Britain specifically.
Absolutely, and we'll come back and explore that more. Tracy, I want to bring you into the conversation. You've been an extraordinary trailblazer for diversity and inclusion in the technology industry. You're a daughter of immigrants. Both of your parents had computer science PhDs. I read stories of you describing your early days as being their first employee, helping pack software in the garage as they mailed that out to their customers. You've got an entrepreneurial spirit inbuilt into you. And you wrote an incredibly powerful piece in Medium just over a decade ago now, which was titled, "Where Are All the Women?" And it was this rally cry to publicise the data around the absence, really, what turned out, of women in the technology industry. And it helped jumpstart what didn't exist at that point, which was the publishing of transparent information around how many women are in the industry, how they're being paid, how many are in leadership. That exists because of Tracy Chow. It's an extraordinary thing to have been, absolutely. So Tracy, we've had a little bit of a conversation on this stage already about the barriers to women in technology. Some women in this room have lived through that and are living in it right now, but how would you characterise the reality for women in tech at this moment in time?
I think I would start by saying that the barriers for women in tech are not necessarily so different to the barriers to women in other industries. It's harder to get in, it's harder to stay in the industry, it's harder to be promoted, it's harder to start companies, it's harder to raise capital, it's harder to hire. But what is very galling about the lack of diversity, and before the lack of diversity data in the tech industry, was the hypocrisy. It's such a data-driven industry, everything is measured, so it can be optimized. The fact that we had no data on diversity was really the industry's way to avoid acknowledging that there was a problem and doing anything about it. The other part of the hypocrisy is that the tech industry builds itself as this engine for innovation. It's what is creating the future, how we interact, how we communicate, how we do everything. And yet it's so regressive in so many ways, with how it excludes women, minorities, and so many other groups from participating in the building of technology. And the ramifications are not just that we don't have as much inclusion in the industry, but the products that we build are worse. And it's not just that they're worse, the quality is a little bit bad, it's that there are ramifications for all of society when everything is built on top of this technology and it's not built in an equitable way.
And I think there's such an interesting through line in what all of our panelists have said around not only data and the importance of shining a light on things that might be well and truly buried under the rug or not, and then secondly, probably Jessica, your point there, but throughout, the stories we then tell off the back of that data. And I think that's something that I just want to make sure we emphasize there as two important levers for change. Tracy, I want to touch on something we haven't really talked about yet with regards to technology, which is the online environment and how that can be for women. Because something you've said is online abuse has upturned my life many times and has completely changed the way I live. Can you share a little bit about this experience and how that's informed your mission?
So this problem of online abuse also ties back to the lack of diversity in the tech industry. When we look at the people who are the ones building all of these platforms that we use today, most of them were fairly homogenous, mostly male, mostly white, and a lot of folks who didn't necessarily understand what their platforms might enable and how people might be targeted on them. The fact that connecting everybody across the world can be a good thing, but also very bad when it's people trying to hurl abuse at you. I became more of a target from doing diversity and inclusion activism work, but many people have also experienced just being a woman online or being any kind of visible can lead to this sort of abuse. So I've experienced everything from garden variety sexism and racism to really targeted, sustained stalking and harassment to coordinated attacks from Reddit and 4chan. Obviously, this is very horrible for me personally, and I felt the mental health impacts of it. But what made me even more pissed off really was that I couldn't participate in the good of the internet either. There was so much I was getting out of being online and being on these platforms and having a voice. I felt that was getting cut off. Then I realized it wasn't just me, it's all these other people that we really want to hear from. Activists, journalists, politicians, disproportionately women and minorities are targeted and silenced. And so we're not able to participate in society, which is so much digital now. That's why I started my company, Block Party, to build these tools for online safety and anti-harassment. Our first product was about filtering out abuse on Twitter, so you could actually still participate and not be drowned in the vitriol that might be hurled your way. Our newest product, Privacy Party, came directly out of my experiences dealing with physical safety issues and being stalked, and it helps you to lock down your social media profile so that you aren't overexposing your data. We're giving you the controls that the tech platforms don't necessarily want to give you because they want you to overshare, overengage, put everything out there. We're on the user side, the individuals who may still want to participate and share with their friends and family, but not broadcast things to the whole world and make it a potential attack vector as well.
Brilliant, well done. Yeah. So I'm keen to come to this question around the women's movement, and even if that language still resonates. And before we do that, I want to set the scene a little bit with our Pulse question, where we asked IWF members from across the world to respond to the following statement. women's workplace rights are improving, societal rights are getting worse. Now, 41% of you, as we can see here, said yes, it's a really troubling paradox. 30% of you said no, they go hand in hand. So interesting, it's probably our closest split in an IWF Pulse poll so far. I'm keen to get our panel's response. Maybe Jessica, I'll come to you for a quick thought on that first. What do you think?
Well, it's thought-provoking.
It is.
And, you know, I think I would fall in the camp of, and admittedly biased by my own experience, having worked, as I said, in a male-dominated industry and being the only woman in the room at the National Hockey League and the National Football League and the NBA, places that were historically built for, by, and with men, that I do think the workplace is improving and that there are opportunities. I think the place where we're seeing challenges is at the most senior level, and I think it's where the roads are reaching their collision around the societal impacts of the framing of the role of women in society. So the expectations of how we do it all, how we balance everything at home and in the workplace, that make it so that the policies that have been developed, I think largely have worked well for the junior people in organizations to provide access, at least again from my own experience. The place where the friction arrives is when women's lives become more complicated and the simple solutions don't work anymore, and it will require a different approach to figure out how to keep women in the workplace. And I think that's showing up in some of the data, but certainly anecdotally, some of the things that I've observed, that in the most senior levels of the organizations, it doesn't appear that women are being in a position to be elevated, promoted, and celebrated, in part because, as a general matter, I think women are tend to be logical and rational in their decision making, and if you don't actually feel that when you look at the full equation that it makes sense, you go to the place where you feel valued, and as a general matter, you feel more valued in your home because you're bumping up against so many both invisible and visible obstacles as you rise the ranks in organizations. So I would tend to agree that the workplace, as a general matter, particularly at the more junior levels, is better, and society is continuing to create constraints that make it impossible for women to continue to ascend.
Gretchen, Tracy, anything to add?
I get asked all the time how, you know, culturally from the outside, it looks like women are going back to the 1960s with some of the things that we've had happen to us, at least in America, over the last couple of years. And people will say to me, you know, how do you wake up optimistic every morning? And, you know, it's this interesting dichotomy of that happening while at the same time, the movement that I'm working on has had immense success for women in passing 2 bipartisan laws in 2022 to stop silencing women, the Ending Forced Arbitration of Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act and the Speak Out Act. So it's this interesting situation that we find ourselves in where women are going back in time, but at the same time, we're pushing forward. And I don't know if I necessarily have an answer to that other than I have to wake up every morning being optimistic and looking at the ladder.
Absolutely. We need to have a playbook for hope, don't we? Because it's one of those important things alongside purpose that keeps us going. Tracy?
I think my main comment is that progress is uneven, and sometimes we'll take 2 steps forward, then 1 step back, and it can feel bad when we're on the backswing. I think right now we look at all the protests about DEI, and sometimes I try to reassure myself it means that we're doing something right, that there is all this backlash. But it feels bad, too. Another comment is on the technology side, it can be an interesting thing to see new domains swell. AI is so big now. Anytime there's a new industry, often the men are the first to get there. There's disproportionate effects on society from all these different technological tools we're building. And so as we keep having these new sectors within technology rise, always led by the men, it can actually cause regression in these other ways. Like if we're thinking about AI displacing jobs, whose jobs are those? Who is getting displaced? So even if we feel like overall we're making some progress, there will also be times where it feels a little bit sad and desperate that we're backsliding.
I think that point around progress isn't linear is a really great one to re-emphasize there. And I want to come now to the particular advocacies each of you are working on with regards to the barriers that you're still facing in your respective areas of pursuit and mission. Jessica, I'll come to you first. I mean, one of the things that you talked about a lot in the context of the most recent broadcast deal you did is that one of the barriers that faces women in sport, and I'm sure we can resonate this with this across a number of industries, is the lack of visibility. That women's sport doesn't get afforded the same casual access that men's sport does, where it's on free-to-air broadcast. You can walk past bars and pubs and they'll have it playing, and so there's the ability for a casual fan to become a ticket holder, a member, to slide into a greater level of engagement. So the other piece you've stressed is we use this unreliable past data to justify future investment. And if we keep doing that, we're stuck in sort of this doom loop where we can never progress. So I'd love for you to just talk to us about how are you pushing back to create a new economic reality for women? How are you tackling that barrier?
Yeah, it's a great question that we've reflected on a lot. I guess a couple of just maybe contextual points. In 2024, with our new media deal, the first year of a 4-year deal, we have 120 national broadcast windows out of our 180 or so games. Last year we had 6. So we've gone from 6 to 120. Imagine a world, and not knowing how many people understand our industry, I'll just give you some maybe data points. Imagine a world where in order to permeate the zeitgeist of the average human, not just sports fan, but human, there are parking spots. Imagine that CBS, ABC, Fox, ESPN, those are windows. And so for a media partner to give us, I shouldn't say give, pay us to offer our live rights to be in those windows, we have to be able to show that the ROI works. This is not a gift, this is not charity, this is not a CSR model, this is not through their foundation. This is the question of, if I am CBS, I could put, as we've done for the last 3 years since I took over, the NWSL Championship in prime time in November, or we could put college football or the World Series. So imagine being faced with that question. So how do we, as a brand, as a live rights holder, help CBS in this instance to understand that this is a good business decision for them? So the way that we approached it, I talked about the RFP and the process. The second component was really unpacking and dissecting the revenue model that media companies use to justify the business decisions that they make to their shareholders. And the revenue model is based on advertising. Advertising dollars from brands are the underpinning of the entire financial model of the media industry. Luckily, we have worked really hard to build our suite of corporate partners who I had been working on for the 2 years prior to the negotiation of our media deal to say, we are going to need you to show up in a very real way. This is not paying us for sponsorship, which they've already done. This is actually spending advertising dollars with our media partners. Will you be there when we need you? Every single one said, yes, we will be there. I went to all of the partners who were considering our RFP and said, if you pay us what we are worth based on our future vision and our future business plan, we will ensure that our partners show up to buy advertising. And what we have done is gone from last year where our advertisers were spending roughly 20% of our partners were spending money with our media partners. Now we're close to 70. And that has, yes. So the bottom line being, you can't do it alone.
Yep.
We needed, and I'll give them some shout outs, Nike, Ally Bank, Nationwide, CarMax, Amazon, Google Pixel. We needed these partners who are Fortune 100 companies to actually show up and spend money in advertising so that we could get paid what we were worth and we could get those extra national broadcast windows. So all of you can go home and tonight, please, watch Amazon Prime. We have a game on, we call it Friday Night Football.
Good plug, well done.
Friday Night Football.
Friday Night Football.
Thursday Night Football, I'm sure everybody knows they have the NFL on Thursday night. Friday Night Football is the NWSL.
All right.
So watch on Amazon Prime tonight,
Partnership.
every Friday of our season.
Brilliant. Now, Gretchen, I want to come to you. I'm gotta say, researching for this conversation, I was astonished by some of the numbers that were shared on the Lift Our Voices website when it comes to the number of Americans, that, given your organisation's focus specifically, that are silenced and unable to share their toxic workplace experiences. So in 2022, just for example, there were more than 90,000 forced arbitrations, a 467% increase from 2021. But get this, consumers and employees won just 0.7%. That is not good math. I mean, let's just call it what it is. How are you approaching this challenge of scaling, given the magnitude of that?
Education. People have no idea what they're signing. So at Lift Our Voices, we move legislation, we do research, because every stakeholder asks us, where are the numbers? There are the numbers that you just said. And number 3, education. And we have to get to the young people to educate them to not sign these papers just that are thrown in front of them, but to ask questions. Think about how paternity leave, for example, was something that nobody did 15 years ago, or it was frowned upon, even though it was legal, and now we've normalized it. Same thing with forced arbitration and NDAs. We need to ask questions about them. Say, I'm not going to sign this. Is it okay if I go to mediation, which is much more fair process than secret forced arbitration? Is it okay if I only have an NDA for trade secrets, for proprietary information, to normalize this? So that is a huge part of trying to get on a different road to transparency. I will also just say that changing culture is more difficult than passing 2 bipartisan laws in the most hyper-political time of our generation. That is a profound statement. Changing culture is almost impossible. And why is it that we penalize people who come forward and immediately try to push them out? That is how we're raised from an early stage, to look at these people as pariahs. And it sounds so simple to just change the way we think, but that is not happening. So I pass laws to force change, but at the same time it has a dual effect. Because right now the power pendulum is this. This is the person who knows you don't have a voice. But the minute you give this person a voice, maybe you stop the behavior. So that has been our strategy all along. Let's go at this, pass laws that people have to follow. And at the same time, we're changing culture, which will take much longer.
Tracy, yeah, please. I found it really interesting, you drew my attention to the fact that if we want to look at the peak of women studying computer science, we actually have to go back to 1984. That was when the number was at its highest, despite all the effort, and I know many of in the room have been involved in these efforts to drive women into studying STEM and to support programs that encourage young women in. So more than 50% of women actually exit the industry before the 10-year mark, which has been described as the broken rung in the ladder problem. Tracy, I'd love for you to direct us on where can we be focusing our efforts to help meaningfully move the dial? How do we get back to 1984 numbers and then some?
I really like looking at the data, obviously, as you know. It really helps us to understand what's happening. The fact that 1984 was the peak where 37% of people studying computer science were women, and it's only come down since then, tells us something, that it's not just about a pipeline problem, which people often will defer to. It's like, oh, just not enough women want to do this, so that's not our problem. He's like, well, there were a lot more. What happened to them? If we didn't also have these pipeline retention issues, keeping people in and promoting them to leadership, then shouldn't we see a lot of women, the ones who graduated in the 80s? Like, shouldn't they all be running these tech companies now? But they're clearly not. So we have not only the pipeline issues, which often have to do with culture, but also the retention and promotion issues. I'll keep driving home that point about transparency of the data, which helps us to understand what's actually happening. Are we making progress? What works? We can talk about all these different strategies we might take, offering more parental leave, sponsoring people to go to conferences, scholarships, but if we don't actually look at the data, we don't know what works. So we need to have all that data out there to understand where the problems are, find out where our leverage opportunities are, and actually hold ourselves accountable to making progress.
Now, I'm going to set my panelists a real challenge because there's 2 more territories I want to cover and we've got a very limited amount of time. So I'm going to ask for as challenging this is going to be, given the questions I'm going to throw you, a 30-second answer on what you think in response to this. Because I think it would be remiss to have such incredible activists and women leading change and not ask them about what they've learnt about how to do that effectively. So Tracy, I want to come to you first. You've described yourself as an accidental spokesperson. You never intended to be in this role. You said in a piece you wrote reflecting on your Medium article, 10 years on, we've achieved a lot less than I hoped for at my most naive, and also a lot more than I despaired about at my gloomiest. What have you learnt about how to lift your voice effectively? 30 seconds.
First, find the right platforms. I was very lucky to be at Pinterest, which was both small enough that I could make change internally and big enough that people cared what we were doing there. And then second, being an insider really helps with the credibility and perspective to be able to speak a language that people care about and be somebody that they can't ignore.
25 seconds, she nailed it, well done. Gretchen, you believe courage is contagious. I wanted to ask you if there's anything that you have learned in your journey of advocacy about how to get a return on courage, about speaking up effectively to drive your mission.
Back to what Jessica said, seeing is believing. When other people see you come forward, others do it. Look, my paramount concern when I came forward were my 2 children, a daughter and a son, and I underestimated them. I've seen that courage transfer to them. But I know it is so much more. And by the way, it's my daughter's 21st birthday today.
Happy birthday.
I know it's so much more because I'm changing the lives of people I will never meet. Millions of people.
Yeah.
The fast food worker, the member of the military, the police officer. Those are the lives that I'm changing, and that's what keeps me going.
Brilliant. Jessica, you had to make some really tough calls when you came into leadership. You issued an apology for conduct, you sent lifetime bans to people, you issued major fines to clubs as part of this clean-up job. You came in at kind of a glass cliff. Is there anything you've learnt about what we need more of from women in leadership at this really challenging time?
Yes, and I actually attribute, I've been often asked, what is the qualification or what is the skill that is most important to be a commissioner of a professional sports league? And I've always said my answer to that question is not that I'm a labor lawyer or that I shadowed Gary Bettman for almost 20 years or that I worked closely with Adam Silver or others. It is that my parents, going back to our upbringing, my parents, in particular my father, told me that I don't need to be beholden to anyone and that a job is a choice and that if I can't show up as my full and authentic self, that it's not the right place for me. And so I actually wake up every single day, although the decisions are absolutely hard, feeling and being so grateful to my dad, who passed away actually almost exactly 3 years ago today, that I actually don't owe anything to anyone except myself, and that my decisions and behavior and leadership will be judged some number of years in the future. And if people don't like the decisions I'm making, it's a free country and they can remove me from my position. And that, thank you,
That's accountability.
that is the most freeing and important characteristic to do my job, because my bosses are also the people I need to discipline at times, which I challenge anyone to imagine disciplining your boss. Not fun, but ultimately my integrity is what drives my leadership, and I will always make the right decision on behalf of what is the right thing to do.
Excellent. All right, I have one final rapid fire question for you all, and we're here celebrating the 50th anniversary of this incredible organisation, the International Women's Forum. We've been talking about the idea of the future of the women's movement, women changing society. What's your rallying cry for the next generation of the women's movement? Tracy, I'm going to start with you and we'll come our way back down. Short, sharp rally cry, what would you say?
Technology is powerful, but the power can be used for good or bad. Let's use it for good.
Boom. Gretchen?
My favorite quote over the last 8 years since I've been on this journey happens to be anonymous. One woman can rock the world. One woman, can make a difference, but together we can rock the world. And that is what we need to think about every single day.
I love it. Brilliant.
I'll throw a quote out as well. I'm a quote person, and the quote that's both in my home office and on the big wall in our actual office is Ruth Bader Ginsburg's "Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that lead others to join you." So I see a room full of a lot of women, and I'm sure we're saying a lot of things that are validating, which I describe as the bobblehead effect, We need men to be part of this conversation, and we need to bring others along and not alienate people, but help them to understand why this is important and to their benefit as well.
What? 3 brilliant rally cries, extraordinary food for thought from 3 women who have blazed remarkable trails and, as you can tell, are by no means done yet. Can you join me in thanking Jessica, Gretchen and Tracy for joining us today? Thank you so much.